Hi everyone, welcome to the latest CTO Craft Bytes. In today's discussion, we'll be covering our topic on future-proofing your IT talent acquisition strategy in the age of AI. If this is your first, lost my screen. If this is your first time at CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a little bit more about what they do. CTO Craft provides a learning and mentoring community for senior technology leaders with a community of thousands of leaders, annual conferences, mentoring groups, and one-to-one coaching, as well as exclusive courses and workshops through the campus platform. Community membership is free, so if you're leading technology teams, you should definitely get involved. My name is Emma Hopkinson-Spark. I'm director here at CTO Craft, and today I am here with Ash Gawthorpe, Chief Academy Officer at 1010. I will let him introduce himself. Go ahead, Ash.
Thanks very much, Emma. Lovely to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. Hi, everyone. I'm Ash Gawthorpe, one of the co-founders and a director at 1010, a tech consultancy. We've been around for, since 2007, so it's kind of coming up to sort of 18 years or so. I'm a hardware and software engineer by background, so very much kind of coming from that practitioner space. We're really looking forward to chatting today around AI, how that's changing what we do from a sort of talent perspective in terms of onboarding people, but maybe even drilling into a little bit as well around what it is that people are doing with AI. And I think we've actually got a couple of little poll questions as well at some point as well, haven't we, Emma? But thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you. For those of you that have not been on before, a little bit about the platform that we're using here today as well. Those of you that have joined us, you can add your questions anytime in that Ask a Question tab. You'll see down the side, you've got a few little icons. You've got chat, which is obviously say hello. I can see a few people have already said hello for some places from all over the place. Ormskirk, I have no idea even where that is. I'm down in sunny Somerset today, and it's super hot and very summery. I'm sure you're in much more glamorous places than I am too. But yeah, do say hello, jump in the chat, ask a question. You'll see down there, there's also some polls that will go live, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on those. We'll bring them into the conversation later on. I will jump into those questions as we go and get through as many as we can during the discussion. We are also recording this session, so you can always rewatch it later as well. So with that, let's jump into the conversation then. And first thing I want to ask is, so we're talking about future-proofing your IT talent acquisition strategy, and just that title makes me go a little bit, because I guess I'm back in those days of the, Yagni, you aren't going to need it, and all that stuff of like future-proofing. Really, is that even possible? Is that what we want to do? What do you mean when you decided this is what you wanted to talk about? What do you mean by future-proofing your IT then?
So I think what we kind of seen, and we've been, just for a bit of context, so we've been building, developing, and running our sort of early talent programs for sort of coming up for 12 years now. And as a consultancy, we were struggling to bring junior people into the organization. And what we're really struggling to bring in were people who had the right blend of skills that we needed to be able to work well in a technology environment. So above and beyond the sort of hard techie skills that you might imagine, soft skills, for example, the ability to influence, to be able to collaborate, to be able to get on with a wide variety of different people. And what we've seen is that a lot of the skills that are required more and more nowadays are actually erring towards that in terms of those soft skills. But actually, I think one of the key things around future-proofing, one of the most important points, is actually around ensuring that individual skills stay current. But at the same time, there's also a lot of the skills that people learn in tech. You kind of learn once and you sort of remain forever. I mean, I think of skills that I acquired around sort of fundamentals of software development, networking, architecture, infrastructure. Learned those things sort of 30 years ago, and a lot of those are still quite relevant today. But then on the other hand, you have things arriving and becoming sort of new things appearing on the scene, I'd say faster than we ever have. And I'd say there isn't an area where that's more prevalent than in AI. And I'd say that one of the fundamental differences is that we've had things come along that have required learning over the years, new languages, new technologies, cloud, when we all went from on-prem infrastructure to the cloud, things like AWS, for example. But what we haven't really seen is something which actually impacts not just what people are doing, but also how they're doing it and whom is doing it. I think that's the other key thing. So, whilst a new language may come along, you still need devs, you still need developers, you still need programmers. A lot of what we're seeing in AI is actually eating into that, particularly that junior market, but also other individuals able to just adopt these new technologies and embed them in part of their workflow. So people that aren't necessarily pure, what you might consider to be pure play technologists, using AI to make themselves more effective, essentially, and able to do more off the back of that. And so for me, the most important thing is that aspect of continuous learning, and people have to want to do that. But I don't think it's necessarily so straightforward. It's one of those things that's really easy to say, you need to stay on board with trends and you need to devote time to doing it, but actually embedding that in as a habit. In our experience of putting hundreds of people through our academy programs where we've needed to instill this into people is quite tricky.
Right. I mean, that's always been an issue, isn't it? I remember even when I was a developer, some, like you say, 25, 30, scary number of years ago, I was really conscious of the fact that your day job is your day job, but then you have to stay on top of new things emerging. So it's always been there. I guess I'm really interested in one of the things you said there about how there's some things that are core and fundamental and will always be relevant knowledge, and then there's some stuff that comes and goes, and you can stay on top of the latest frameworks and how many people went Ruby on Rails and then forget it all years later. And there's some stuff that comes and goes, but some stuff that is there forever. Do you think then that this in this age of AI and LLMs all over the place and really understanding it, is that moving into that kind of its core, it's going to be here forever, it's stuff that you need to learn forever? Or is it, when you say future proofing, is it protecting that this is something new and core and everyone needs to know it? Or how transient do you think some of this stuff is? And even what future proofing means, because is what for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, what do we mean by that?
I think one of the interesting things to unpick there is when we talk about AI in terms of what that actually means, because I think that varies according to the speeds at which new things are coming out. So on the one hand, if you consider something like agentic AI, for example, so workflow tools and processes that are given agency to be able to make decisions themselves using LLMs to then drive different subtools and sub-processes and calling out to other tools, that's changing at a rate of knots, sort of on a weekly basis. There are new things coming out there. But at the same time, some things within, let's say, machine learning group within the AI, a lot of the maths that underpins that has been around for centuries. The concepts of calculus, sort of linear algebra, probability statistics. This stuff's been around for a very, very long time. And so depending on which aspects of AI we're actually talking about, that varies tremendously. But in terms of future-proofing, the skills required to engage across those different levels and to be productive in those different levels of AI are completely different. Some of them you need at least maths A level, but maybe to some extent a long way down the degree in maths to be able to do it. But at the other end of it, some of it's much more around sort of conventional software design and development and process development, and requires those business analysis skills to be able to speak with the business, to be able to translate those technical requirements backwards and forwards. I think it really varies. So one thing that would be really good is just sort of get under the bonnet of that a little bit, and really just understand when people are talking about AI, kind of maybe a common frame of reference and what that kind of means and encompasses maybe.
I have to be honest, I mean, it's what now, 2-3 years ago since they all started getting quite noisy about it. And it did used to make me cross, because it's like, it's not AI you're really talking about, is it? It's an LLM you're trying to build, or what you're really talking about is machine learning, and which is it? And we're so far off actual general intelligence of, it's not the same thing. Do you still find then that there is that misunderstanding, or do you think everybody is, I feel like I've almost given up on that fight of arguing with people about it, because it's just, okay, fine, I know what you mean, I know what you think you mean, and we'll just move on from there. But is there much misunderstanding thing to still
massively? I mean, a lot of our customers that we're working with on sort of AI pilot projects and where we're implementing AI ourselves is hugely varied. In fact, I'll give you an example. We're at a round table a couple of weeks ago, a public sector round table, which was all about AI implementation and people sharing their experiences there. And around the table, everybody was there to talk about AI, but we had some people who were talking about, let's say, pilots to switch on Copilot, to try that within within their organization, and then let it run for 6 weeks and then switch it off again, and sort of see who complained or see who was using it, see who shouted about it, through to other organizations using LLMs to drive chatbots, but based on their own knowledge, so essentially their own knowledge base, but with a sort of RAG layer on top of it, so that LLM is able to understand comprehensively what everything they do, and so can comment and can respond well around questions specifically derived around a particular organization's products or its services, or specific aspects of that. And then at the other end of the scale, you then had organizations that were very, very mature in that. To your point there, Emma, talking about machine learning, huge data sets generating very advanced insights from it, with a whole team of data scientists and engineers essentially designing models, building models, training models, deploying models, and generating insights off it. And what became quite clear in that round table was that without that common frame of reference, it was going to be very, very difficult to sort of move forward with it, aside from some of the general things around, perhaps the fact that the idea of implementing a project, build small. There will be people who will be very much pro this and the champions of it. There'll be people at the other end of the spectrum as well who are very much against it, with a whole group of people in the middle. And so how do you, it almost boiled down to the base layer was, how do you implement change in an organization, and what does that look like? But in terms of the skill sets of people around the table, you had people who ran IT help desks, people who were managers in the organizations, through to people with PhDs in machine learning, who've been doing this for 20 or 30 years and published papers, sort of peer-reviewed papers in the big journals around it. So this huge spectrum, but everybody talking about AI.
Yeah, just I guess bringing it back to that, particularly talking about like talent acquisition, when it's that broader term and such a varied experience, it makes it difficult then on both sides of the table to match the skills that you need with the skills that the people have as well. How do people know what it is that they're hiring for, and what's the market actually out there at the minute for the skills that people have and what they can bring to the table?
I think the first thing to be clear on is what you're hiring people for. Within the scope of that very broad range of AI things, what is it that you're actually looking for somebody to do? I think there's an element of, there are so many different tools and so many different aspects and things that people can use, that those traditional models of just matching based on, well, I need somebody with this skill. So let's find somebody with that skill. And we've gone to the teams and we've said, well, what is it that you guys need? And they've come up with a list of 30 things. And so we're looking for an individual matching on those 30 things. Just never going to happen. But adding some intelligence to it around, well, that tool is very, very similar to that tool, and that's 90% of the way there. So actually that person would be able to adapt into that role, or even recognizing, this is really what the route we go down, that if you hire for attitude and aptitude, and then people have that continuous learning mindset, and that's something that they're keen to do, and that they are trained and supported in the right way, people can achieve pretty much anything. But people equally aren't good at everything, so you have to expose them to a little bit of everything, and then have them work out what they're good at. And that's essentially the way that we sort of approached our model, because we were, when we first started our sort of academy of bringing people into the organization and training them and selecting them based on attitude and aptitude, we were just really struggling to bring junior technical talent into the organization. Just hiring with maths, comp sci, engineering degrees, those kind of disciplines, which are great. And I think it is still, in my mind, the gold standard way of sort of bringing people into the organization. But so many people fall off the side of that wagon in terms of their own learning and background, because to end up with a degree in computer science, you have to have made a pretty specific decision aged about 14 in the UK in terms of tuning the right GCSEs, which leads to the right A levels, which then leads to the right degree. There are so many people I know of who work in the industry who are doing really well, who don't follow that traditional pathway and who actually fall off that pathway. Perfectly capable of doing it, but those doors traditionally have been closed to them. And I think, moreover, in this world where those soft skills are becoming more important, just as important in many cases as those hard skills, and actually as technology and AI erodes sometimes the need for some of those hard tech skills, and will continue to do so, those soft skills become more and more important. So having people that you bring into the organization with the right mindset, who are able to get on with a wide range of different people, they are able to communicate in the right way at the right time. Tech skills can be taught, but actually teaching some of those soft skills is really, really tricky.
Do you think that we will need fewer engineers than in the future? One of the things I really worried about a few years back when we first started talking about subjects like this was everyone I spoke to was telling me that, okay, using AI to go help with them with code generation, low code platforms, stuff like that. Really, they're useful. They're a good tool, but really, it's like using a junior. So you still need somebody senior to go over the top of it. And all I could hear was alarm bells going. Then where are the juniors going to come from? Where's the learning going to come
Mhm.
from?
Mhm.
I've always believed, and I agree with you completely about those people skills, communication skills. That's where the real value comes from having a team. But thinking of 10 years time, the way that we're going, what is my engineering team going to look like? What shape are they going to be? What skills am I going to be able to, what am I going to need? I worry for the future of getting younger, junior, new engineers in. When where's their opportunity to learn if the work of a junior is being done then by AI? Is that just me fearing Skynet taking over, or do you think that's a valid concern there?
I think it's absolutely valid. One of my concerns is also then, and what I really hope doesn't happen is that organisations sort of put short-term profit over long-term. Well, also giving people the opportunity, but also their own longevity within the industry, because those juniors cutting their teeth on fairly base level things, which then you don't do anymore as a senior or a lead or a principal. But who then are the seniors, the leads, and the principals of tomorrow or 5 or 10 years if you aren't populating those junior rungs? And I don't think it's just in tech. You're starting to see that in consultancy. You're starting to see a lot of the large consultancies sort of really pull back on the number of juniors that they're hiring, because so much of what they do can be done through AI and through other tools. Absolutely. I mean, with the human in the middle, checking the work and everything else. And I really hope that we do go down that path. But I think at the same time, there have been a few things, I think, in the last few decades where we've seen this kind of, oh, this is going to mean that so many people are going to be out of work and all the rest of it. But in actual fact, it often creates far more jobs and opportunities that never existed before. And if we look over the last sort of 5 or 10 years in terms of those job roles that we see nowadays, so many of those just didn't exist. But I also do firmly believe that having that individual, to some extent, everybody needs to recognize that they are architects of their own careers, essentially, and it's on them to learn, and it's on them to actually do this. Yes, you may be supported by your business, and we do that and guide people through it within our own organization. But at the same time, it's kind of on the individual to do this. They shouldn't expect somebody else to do it for them. But being guided and kind of signposted and doing that, I think, is really important. But that I would say is the most important skill to kind of be current. And some people, I've had conversations with some people in the past where they say, oh, it's quite age limited. Maybe it's easier in your 20s or your 30s, but then you get into your 40s and 50s, that's harder. I don't believe that
Rude.
necessarily. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I recall a friend of mine at university who, when we finished our engineering degrees, he said to me, well, that's great. He said, I'm done now. I don't need to learn anything else. It's kind of, no, I don't think that's the way it works.
What's he doing now?
Well, he went into project management. So I guess to some
There you
extent,
go.
maybe there's an industry where things are quite remain the same.
That's so rude to project managers. I'm terrible. Just to remind everybody, do please ask your questions as we go. I'll happily pose them to Ash. And don't forget the polls that we have as well. I'm just keeping a little eye on it. The questions, by the way, that we've got in the polls, if you've not looked, is we've got, what platform are you planning to use in AI implementation? So you've got some options there to look at. And there's another, what AI solutions are you looking to implement? So do please go add your opinions to those, and we'll look at the results of that a little later on. And yeah, any particular questions you would like to pose and get involved in, experiences you want to share, then pop those in the chat as well as we go. I'm just looking through some of the notes that we put together before we did this. So building an AI ready workforce for one. So yeah, is that, you say it's that continuous learning attitude? What are you finding it like? Is there resistance to it in quarters? How are you actually doing that then, getting people ready for the fact that this is going to probably change what they're doing and how they work?
I think organisations are in different places as well. Certainly, the customers that we're working with, there are different stages of that sort of AI adoption. There are some of them that are still sort of looking at it and working out what it is that they need to do. There are some organisations where they're kind of on proof of concepts. So they've started off down that path, and then they are circulating that within the organization, sort of demonstrating value with something small, winning hearts and minds. And then there are other organizations where, to some extent, the individuals are just doing it themselves, which can be a little bit dangerous sometimes without the guardrails or without the guidance in terms of what is safe to do, where they should be doing it, and everything else. But I think as well that middle group of organizations where they've implemented proof of concepts, they're then sort of at the next level in terms of where do they take it from there. Because I think one of the challenges is producing a proof of concept is absolutely fine. Then you put that in front of the business and you kind of demonstrate that to them. But often there's a misalignment in terms of the business's understanding of what that proof of concept actually is, and the chasm between that and an actual enterprise scalable, secure solution, which can be put into production and run forever. So we certainly come across a few customers where they've implemented a proof of concept, but then it doesn't scale, or it isn't secure, or there are concerns around customer data and how that is stored and where it's stored. Requirements around where geographically that can be stored in the world, for example. If it's just sat there on a cloud platform, where is that data actually going? What's it look like? So definitely there is work going on around implementing proof of concepts from the start, but also then taking on proof of concepts and implementing those as enterprise solutions, which is a lot more of maybe the traditional engineering that goes on there, but it's definitely taking it from that science space to sort of how do I generate insights from this data on a sort of one-off basis and almost a sort of ad hoc requirement basis, through to how do I make this scalable, secure, and actually a proper working tool that the organization as a whole can use. But then, of course, you've then got all that side of, well, you can have this amazing tool, but if people aren't using it, how do you actually increase adoption? How do you actually get people to do it? And that's about identifying champions in the organization who really are quite pro this and have that ability to influence and are the natural communicators. Yes. And then kind of set them off, and then have them, and I think really have them demonstrate value to individuals, because if they're feeling pain in a particular process, which is manual and fraught with danger in terms of things being copied from one place to another, or just the same drudge work over and over again, if you come along and say to somebody, look, we've got something here which will definitely help with that, I think most people are very, very happy to look at that. Obviously, the next question is, if that's the entirety of somebody's job, well, then what can they do off the back of that? But one thing we see, particularly when automating workflows, is that you've maybe got a view of how the business thinks that workflow works, as opposed to then the people that are actually running it on the ground day in, day out, who know all the workarounds, all the nuances. And if you can actually identify in your organization those people who have the potential to be able to move into these kind of roles, and those are the people that you want in those roles all day long, because they know your organization, they know your processes, they know the people within the organization and how to navigate it, right, which is important of organizations at any scale. But as you get these huge organizations, that's half the battle in itself, just knowing how to navigate your way around those.
So what are the risks, I guess, of some of that? I sound like such a cynic. I'm like obviously in a bad mood today or something, but quite frankly, it's been years since we first started talking about it. I've always been cynical. But in the back of my head, I have questions like, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. And there was, what was it, just all over the news and social media anyway, the last few weeks, like saying please and thank you to ChatGPT, costs spending millions in processing power, and we're killing the planet just by being polite and stuff. And there's obviously so much hype, and everybody, and we're going through all this time of like, oh, what are we doing with AI? We've got to do something with AI. Well, what then? And then go figure out, so here's the new thing, we should figure out how we can do something with that, and then off we go. Is it really adding value to the organization? Part of me wonders if it's going to be like everyone try and do as much as they can, and then actually the real value is in this little bit over here, but we have to do the boom before we find the real things that are valuable and people should be doing. So I do kind of have that thought in my head, but interested in, especially with the clients that you're working on and what you're seeing so much close to it, how are you seeing that? Is it booming and then going to refine? Are we doing more than we should? Are we just looking for excuses to go use it for everything?
I think I think it's all those things. I think whenever some new technology comes out, a lot of the tech teams are going to be driven by wanting to find an application for it. And I don't think that's really such a bad thing. A lot of good comes out of experimentation,
Yeah.
and I think that needs to be encouraged as well. I think there are challenges through trying to make something too large. And I think a lot of the value comes from building something small, which is actually quite focused, because as soon as it becomes more general, it becomes much more complicated in terms of how it runs and the testing that's required then around that before it can be deployed into production. Just goes through the roof, so sort of exponentially. So I think having something where there's a very clearly defined use case, where you see a need, where it's been quite simple, but it's been used an awful lot, and it is taking an awful lot of people's time, for example. I think that's a really key factor to focus on. Again, look at the business benefit. What's the business benefit of me implementing this?
Right.
And then kind of work your way back. But at the same time, don't expect these things to always work. In fact, there's always that thing of if it's working all the time, then you're probably not trying hard enough. You're probably not reaching far enough. That failure is a huge part of learning and something that needs to be embraced. But failure in the right way, when you're not betting the farm on it, when it's something small, which is very little very, very little impact. And also, I think having these things running with a human in the middle, sort of checking everything at first as well. I mean, I think in the LLM space, in the last few months, we've gone from a place where, and this was one of my biggest frustrations with them, where you were able to do something within an LLM, and it was able to reason in some cases. It was able to come up with some very, very good content, but it couldn't actually do anything else. It could generate code, or it could write an email for you, or even come up with a summary of a PowerPoint deck, for example, telling you what needed to be on each slide. But it couldn't actually drive that. Now with MCP that Anthropic have come out with, that model context protocol, it's able to call out, essentially use other tools. So whether that's create a PowerPoint deck, whether that's call out Google Maps to find out the best way to get somewhere, or directly call into a database, or there's a huge number of NCP servers getting created, this whole sort of industry of them, which allow these LLMs to then be connected to other tools, to then be able to, as you said there, Emma, earlier, sort of remove that sandbox, and these are now able to call out into them. I think one of the challenges there is that then that can become quite risky. Imagine if you have something which is suddenly able to not just email a couple of people, but is able to flood the system, or it's able to do something really unfortunate to that database, or there's a whole host of things that which makes it more powerful, and is actually, in my mind, overcome one of the biggest limitations of LLMs. But at the same time, there's an awful lot of risk within that. And it really does feel a little bit like the Wild West at the moment in terms of what's out there and what's going on. So I think there's a huge opportunity. And I, frankly, there've been a few things over the years which have been a little bit faddish. I think they've come in and they've gone away. I don't think this is. I think because it's not just a new tech that does something different. It's fundamental in terms of how people work in not just tech, but in any industry. And almost that thing of a tool which makes it, yes, it does make it easier for people to do their work and can make people more effective. But at the same time, it can also, in some cases, replace some people for sure. In some of the creative industries, for example, copywriters, people generating diagrams, images, infographics, those kind of things. That's a concern. That's a worry, I think. Organizations that spent a lot of time converting from one language to another, for example, translating things. Nowadays, they're getting pretty damn good in terms of their approach. I think it depends on the context as well. If you're having a LLM write some copy for you, or even go away and research something using Perplexity or something like that, and then come back and then create the copy off the back of it, and you iterate over that cycle and can question it. Ultimately, what you end up with there is the end product. And you are the backstop there to say, am I happy for this copy to go out the door?
Yeah.
Whereas if it's something that's far more impactful, if it's classifying images, for example, in a medical context, then the risk associated with that is much, much greater in terms of, whether it's creating false positives or false negatives.
Thinking then, in the context of everything we've spoken about, and about the skills that you need in this idea of like a future team, given the age that we're going into and AI going everywhere. As we've been speaking, I'm trying to build up a picture in my head then of what my future IT talent pool is going to look like, what skills they have, what kind of profile am I looking at for a team. And I'm building a picture of some people that are really maths heavy because they're going to need to understand
Yep.
the algorithms and things. People that are really discerning and cynical, probably in their approach of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
or questioning or challenging. People that know how to communicate with other people and translate ideas and take something very technical and be able to translate it and communicate it out wide and get buy-in. People that are very risk conscious and are probably more questioning than they have been in the past. Instead of always had a thing of where we've got developers and testers in a room. It's developers want things to work, testers want things to break. I'm imagining a much more of a future where I've got a bunch of technologists. They're always conscious of what could go wrong with this, or what if this data goes to the wrong place, or how could this be misused, and is that really bringing me back the truth? And so yeah, people that are much more, I guess, critical in their judgment of things. Is that a different shape of IT professional that we have right now? Am I imagining a dystopian future, or what do you see that kind of profile of technologists in the future then?
I think those skills of questioning, I think, are absolutely essential, of questioning, but also of being able to see solutions in disparate things and to be able to bring those ideas and those concepts together. I mean, if we take that example that you were talking about of testing and development, that there are examples and organizations are using this at the moment where that role of a tester, in terms of obviously manually running test execution scripts, that still exists in some areas, in some contexts, but for a couple of decades now, automation has meant that it's possible to remove some of that, or to have that automated, but that came with overhead, that came with maintenance overhead. You're now in a place where AI is able to generate those automated tests for you in some context. Some of those then also able to self-heal. So a lot of us moved away from a lot of the actual work of, well, how do I get this thing to work? How do I keep it working? To a challenge of, okay, applying my knowledge at a slightly higher level now, which has always gone on. But I think it was a smaller part of the role.
Yeah.
Becoming an increasing part of the role as you become more senior. But now I think from the outset, that's going to be more important, and certainly a critical skill. I think the role of, to some extent, of people just doing things that they're told, I don't think is necessarily that long-lived. I think people that can actually question things in the right way, crucially, but also come up with new ideas, new approaches, and be willing to try and test those out in a safe environment, I think is absolutely essential. But also, exactly as you said, that roll towards more soft skills. We talked about dev there. I was on a video call with a customer the other day, and we're talking about how things have changed. How if you go back 20, 25 years, longer even, just to be able to get Windows to produce a dialog box on the screen, you required a very deep understanding of the underlying way that the machine was working, and then quite a good comprehension and understanding of language like C++, very having to get into all the complexity of it just to put the dialog box on there, and then throw away the dialog box and not get a memory leak at the end of it. We've gone to a place now where it's where that is able to be done in a sort of low code, even no code environment. But to a point you made earlier around, you can, but should you? You can still, I think you can still make poor architectural design decisions and do things the wrong way, which somebody who isn't able to code in that example can create an app and can do it. But will it scale? Will it be maintainable? Is that the right fundamental approach? Or are they going to find themselves in a corner, having painted themselves in at that point? And I think we're seeing that with AI as well, where that proof of concept stage is one step. But then how do you avoid yourself painting yourself into that corner with one eye on what is it I actually need to be building for the future here? How do I turn that POC into a scalable enterprise application?
Do you think in some ways it's meaning because it's easier to do some of that basic stuff? We're more likely to go down that kind of dead end or paint yourself into the corner. Do you think
I
we're
think so. Yeah, I think so.
right now?
If you don't have the skills or the experience or the guidance in terms of what those potential pitfalls are, you can actually get a prototype working. But then, and it supports the one user concurrently when you're testing it. But then if this needs to evolve to 200,000 users, for example,
Yeah.
that's a very, very different proposition. And if you're just not even aware of those things, that can come and bite you quite hard and
Yeah.
quite quickly. I think particularly if that's against the backdrop of all the hype, because the business has seen, because you've demoed this to them, that you can do this, and they're like, amazing, brilliant. Well, let's roll it out to the whole business now. You've made it work. I remember what years and years ago, working for an interdealer broker, and we had this trading system front end that had been created, but it was just to demo the actual front end. The back end was entirely sort of synthetic market data. It wasn't connected to anything. But it was just to demo the front end and the sort of the workflows and how it would look. And so very senior people in that room were like, yeah, this is amazing. Let's roll it out. Okay, well, no, we can't. There's nothing behind this. It's a facade. It's months engineering effort to get to a point where this is actually a proper product.
Right.
And I think with so much hype behind this, I think there is a danger of actually showing a proof of concept in that sense to a very senior stakeholder, and suddenly the expectation being, well, you showed me it working, so this can now just, that just happens, right?
Yeah, like you say, your example that was years ago. It's always been there, hasn't it? The idea of like, oh, it's a 5-minute change. Why is it taking so long? Like, well, yeah, it's a 5-minute change on the machine, or is it? Yeah.
And the industry is riddled with various scenarios over the years where a proof of concept, or this is just a quick prototype which will go in there, is then still running decades later in some cases.
Yes, I can imagine. One of the things I guess I've always been conscious as well is we've always had conversations about that, like, grads straight out of university with their computer science degree are not prepared for the world of work. Like, are they teaching them the right skills that you need to then jump into an organization and actually be a software developer rather than just know software development? The kind of skills then that we're talking about now, and we've just sort of built that profile of what skills you might need in the future. Are we getting those? Are they teaching for that in universities? Are those the Gen Zers now, or Gen Alphas? I'm really old. Do they have all those skills? Are they coming with them, or are we having to still nurture it and build it and say, okay, park your degree, now learn what it's really like to be in the work?
I think over the years, we've often found ourselves in a scenario where we've hired people with a comp sci degree, for example, and they have that base knowledge, but often a lot of the ways in which they work are very different to how that works in the real world. So, for example, somebody's maybe done a software project. It's been their own work, just them. And they're not working often in a multi-developer team under sort of source code management and all the strategies that need to go along with that, working on a shared code base, a large shared code base. I think as well, obviously, the universities are in a bit of a tricky place because they need to give a person a degree, which can also be done as an academic qualification. They need to know that person can do it. So they need to know it's their own work. They need to know that they haven't just borrowed it from somewhere else or built on something else. Right. They also need to know that they haven't just got anybody to help them with it. So the way in which that works, and kind of, well, I thought that through myself. I kept my head down. I came up with my own solution to it. And after a couple of weeks, here we go. This is my work.
Right.
It's very, very different to what the industry uses and needs. You're not going to be thanked in the role, in an actual job, for working like that. The response is going to be, well, it took you a fortnight. The code that you've written in that case barely works, and it's nowhere near as good as it should be. If you'd have asked the person sat next to you with 15 years experience, they'd have guided you and told you within 10 minutes that that's the wrong approach and you should do it this way instead. Or, why didn't you just use that project that's 95% of the way there? The other one. Or in the case of, nowadays, well, why didn't you use AI to help you write that? Because I think and you sometimes get people coming out of there on when we're training them, there's this mentality of, oh, well, that's cheating. It's kind of, no, it's not. It's about effectiveness. It's about getting it to work. And so I don't know how the universities will do that. I mean, how we do it is we sort of say, well, this assignment, this piece of work, it is done in that academic environment. We need to know it's you doing it, and that it isn't just somebody else's work, to know that you've sort of achieved that level. But then it's a case of saying, okay, right, now we're just going to take the stabilizers off, essentially. Now it's kind of a case of you just building this thing as quickly and effectively as you can do, and you use whatever thing is out there to make that faster, easier, and better. And so I think as long as people are aware of that when they land in a role, that they are able to then be effective, and they are effectively using what's there. And that mindset is then switched from the academic world, or that degree sort of, I must pass this module, this assignment, and that behavior changing from a set of behaviors that would frankly get you booted off your degree course to suddenly one where you're probably going to find yourself with some pretty sticky questions to ask if you take that same approach, which was very successful and the only one that you could do as part of your academic learning. So we definitely see that. Yeah.
Using all those tools and resources available to you is a skill in its own right. So you don't want people that don't know how to be quicker and more effective and to gather and to collaborate with other people. And yeah,
completely. And I think sometimes in traditional personalities that often thrive in tech environments, that can be a little bit tricky as well. There's sometimes that thing of, I'm going to get my head down and I'm going to work my way through this. I'm going to fix this myself.
yes.
And the reluctance sometimes to hold the hand up and say, hey, I'm stuck here. And so we find ourselves having to train people a lot in that to get them to unlearn those kind of behaviors. Yes. Almost encourage them, stick your hand up as soon as possible. If you don't know, there's absolutely no shame in that. It's all about the result and getting it done. And I think as well, even using tools like Cursor, for example, people saying, well, it feels a little bit like it's cheating. It just gives you the answer. It's well, not really. The code it generates is often very good and very well thought through and very well commented, but also it explains what it's done and why it's done it. So it's actually really useful as a learning tool as well. Mm-hmm. People to be able to sort of look at that and embrace that and then think, okay, I've now written, the end result is good code, but I understand why it works and also why that path was taken and maybe why not that path.
Mm. I'm going to pull in a question that's gone in the audience because it leads on to something else I want to dig into a little bit as well. So we've got a question. In your experience, what soft skills have proven critical for effective generative AI teams? How do you assess these skills during recruitment? So let's talk about that particularly. How do you assess for it? And then I've got to follow up with it digs in a little bit trickier as well.
Sure. Right? Yeah. So I think there's two key sides to it. So you've got the soft skills, which you can sort of engage in sort of or understand and assess on almost a one-on-one basis, which is essentially how well people communicate, how well they kind of respond when they're kind of under pressure. And we have some questions in the interview that we ask them deliberately. And we tell them we're doing it. We're not really mean about it. We say, okay, this is something deliberately designed to just keep getting you thinking and to keep you on that and sort of see how well you do. There's a lot of scenario-based assessments that we run through as well in terms of what would you do in this kind of scenario. Group work, that's absolutely essential. Understanding how people get on with and collaborate with other people, obviously that they are taking on other people's ideas on board. So you want to make sure that people are engaged in the conversation. And then actually one thing we found ourselves doing as well is also just evaluating people maybe when it's not so clear that they are being evaluated on an assessment day, because there's much about the soft skills, and we've learned this the hard way over the last sort of 12 years of been running this, is that sometimes people, when they think that they need to perform, they're often a very different person to what they're like when the spotlight isn't on them.
Yeah.
And you need people that can show up and be consistent. That's really key. And I think that's actually sometimes another behavior that we sometimes see at people coming out of universities where it's a case of they need to pass that exam and that's the only thing that counts at the end of that third year, for example. Whereas in the world of work, it's about showing up every day and being consistent, and not just when the spotlight is on you performing, but performing all the time. One really interesting insight when we looked at the data in terms of what indicates whether people will do well in those soft skill assessments is actually if somebody's worked in a retail environment, if somebody's worked in a bar, in a restaurant, in a pub, in a shop, that goes a long way towards it.
Interesting.
Because I guess one, it shows that they have turned up every day and they have done that, but also they do have experience of dealing with members of the public and having to communicate with them, and sometimes when things that are entirely not of their own making go wrong, that they have to find themselves in a situation where it can get quite heated. But at the same time, also recognize that hey ho, that's just in the moment. You don't walk away with that and sort of let it simmer for days afterwards. You kind of think, no, I'm going to it happened. Hey ho, off we go. We move on from it. And so I think those things are absolutely essential. They can be taught, they can be steered, they can be improved for sure as well. I don't want people thinking that if people are maybe a bit introverted or something like that, thinking, oh gosh, this, how am I going to survive in the tech world where these skills are essential? it's these things can be learned. Experience can be doing it. The people who join our course where they're very, very confident when it comes to coding, for example, but you give them a whiteboard and a marker and ask them to stand up in front of people, and they're petrified at the prospect of that.
Yeah.
And I was one of them, absolutely. But over the years, you just get better at that, and these skills can be learned just like anything else, just by putting yourself, stepping outside that comfort zone a little bit.
One of the things that says a lead on from that, really, and where my head was going with the question anyway, is the kind of skills that we're talking about are actually really broad and not like, if I think of myself as a hiring manager dealing with loads of job adverts these days, get hundreds and hundreds of responses to things. Think of a traditional sift of just getting through the who do I want for this role, who do I not. It's really easy to say, oh, they've done Java and they've done 10 years in this. No, it's easy to say those hard skills, those technical skills, but the kind of skills that they're actually talking about that are going to be so important in the future of this team that we're imagining are actually really broad. Like you say, people with bar work and retail experience and things like that. So in some ways, it kind of opens it up to a much more diverse workforce in the future. But how do you even find those people then? So somebody to stand out in the crowd and say, actually, there's a nugget here of somebody that would make an excellent, they've got the right attitude, they've got the right curiosity and desire for learning. How do you even find that person in amongst a sea of CVs with 10 years Java and 2 years this and my computer science degree? And how does that stand out? How do you open up that market, I guess?
We do experience hires, but actually for juniors into the organization, we've sort of turned that model on its head essentially, and we now hire them for attitude, aptitude, soft skills, technical aptitude, but without them necessarily having technical experience. And then we train them ourselves in the tech that they need. One really important point then is then matching the individual to the kind of role that they're going to be going into and the customer that they're going to be going into. And I think that I've just seen something come in from Matt there. I think that to some extent addresses some of those challenges. So we come at this from a slightly different aspect. We sort of place people in roles that we feel are right for them with organizations that are right for them. So what makes them sort of stick in that organization is almost a sense of their values being aligned to what the company's looking for, and also what the company wants to do. And I think that's very different to organizations and a lot of our customers amongst them, where they have individuals join them who are almost just looking at it from a very short-term horizon. How can I join this organization? How can I gain the skills? And then how can I quickly go somewhere else for a higher salary or whatever that kind of looks like? That's going to be hard, and that is hard in this market. One thing we have seen, though, is that AI aside, some of the more traditional tech markets, we're starting to see individuals be a little less reluctant to sort of job skip in that way in the current market.
Right.
But how long that will last for, I don't know. But it comes down to, Matt, what you said there really, aside from the usual things of compensation and everything else, it's really sort of giving people opportunities and challenges within the organization, challenges to upskill, challenges to reskill, challenges to maybe lead projects or to lead teams. Ultimately finding out what it is that what drives those individuals and what it is that they want, and then trying your best within the concepts of what you're able to do to be able to sort of meet those requirements. Now, gosh, that's hard, right? We have that. Yes, it'd be great for this person to do this, but the commercial reality is they need to do this. This project's coming up. It's all hands to the pumps while that's kind of been done. So there are constraints there, but I think that's really important.
And that kind of, I guess, I always thought of certainly years ago that kind of 2 to 3 years is about what you'd expect anyone to stay. Actually, I guess the faster technology moves, the faster people want to move on as well. Are you seeing much change then? What do you think is an average kind of 10
That's
years
a really
old?
interesting one. At any point in time, we work with sort of 60 different customers across many different sectors. And yes, some of them are traditional sort of tenure of 2-3 years. Equally, we work with customers where they kind of have the opposite problem, where their average tenure is 30 years.
Yeah. What you say is the opposite problem. Sounds great, doesn't it? But actually, you need that.
Still a problem, very much so. And then how do you bring juniors into that organization? Because you've got a ticking, not quite a burning platform, but you've got this event horizon coming up, which is where a lot of your skilled workforce with all that knowledge are then going to retire.
Yeah. Another question that's just been asked, actually, I'm going to pop this one up as well, which kind of leads into that you've got an existing team and you're wanting to upskill them. So we want to build an AI agent, but can't afford to hire new people for that. We already have a team of BE, FE, full stack software engineers. What is a good way to upskill them to guide them from traditional way of web dev thinking to a mix of that and AI agents, MCP, RAG, etc.?
Mhm.
What do you focus on when actually you can't bring in new people? You've got to upskill the people that you've got.
Completely. I think I guess the great thing is that there are, gone are the days where in order to gain these skills, you needed to go away on a course run by one of the large tech providers, which took a fortnight, and you had to go to a hotel and cost £10,000. Yeah, a lot of very good quality training materials exist out there on the web to be able to do this. The downside is a lot of very poor quality training materials also exist on the web in order
Right.
to do this, and it's very hard sometimes to work out which ones are good and which ones aren't. I think the first thing to do there, Artem, is to really sort of look at where it is you're going with it, because there are a huge number of agentic AI frameworks. I mean, MCP, that's maybe a bit more straightforward in terms of what that sort of architecture looks like and how you build that out. RAG, lots of options around that in terms of different products. To be able to sort of work out where it is you're going with that, and then seek out the materials to be able to put them through. I mean, one good way that we find to do this is to actually also encourage people to almost do this sometimes themselves, to be able to research themselves and see what they can find and come back with, and then sort of evaluate that and then steer them down the path. I mean, the way that we traditionally sort of approach this with our customers, and I don't want to turn this into sort of the salesy thing, but essentially, yes, you can train them, but you need to start off in the right way. And whilst that's not necessarily about hiring new people, that might be about just getting some advice up front. So the way in which we do it is we have practitioners varying from people with decades of experience down to very, very juniors, and we sort of go in there. We can do the advisory bit. We can look at what's required. We can then sort of set you off down that path. Now you can then do that yourselves, or you can do that with our assistants. And we can then bring our juniors in to be able to then have you hire them further down the line, or indeed actually have them to work with yourselves, sort of look at what's required to upskill, depending on what tech stack you're using. I mean, we, for example, use a lot of AWS. We're an AWS Advanced partner. So when it comes to generating these AI proof of concepts, there's actually some things that you can do in AWS's land, for example, to actually be able to get AWS to put their hands in their pockets a little bit and help with some of that funding. So that's something that we can do. But actually, the easiest thing, Artem, might be for you to just reach out to me directly after this, and we can just run through just what that might look like. Or at least steer you in the right path and right direction, just when we understand a bit more about what you're looking for. Wouldn't be long. It'd only take a quick sort of half-hour conversation, something like that, quick video call, but very happy to do that.
I should say, actually, so we're only about 5 minutes or so towards the end, but I don't think I've got links available. Maybe Hannah or someone in the background can do that and just pop like LinkedIn contact details and stuff. So I'm sure Ash would be very happy to connect and everything and carry on the conversation. Also, if you're not on the CTO Craft Slack channels, you should probably do that as well. Join the community. Ash, I don't know if you're on there as well. You should totally join, and then
I will be. Yep.
we'll carry on conversations on Slack as well. I'm sure we're very happy to answer any more questions. Just take a minute maybe to have a look at the polls and the results that have come on. Anybody does have any more questions, do jump. We'll probably have time for a couple more. But just looking over at the polls at the minute and looking at the results. So what platform are you planning to use in your AI implementation? What can you read into that then? I see 50% saying a combination. So what does that tell you then, Asha? Is that people just deciding what they want and best of rather than using what they've got and sticking? I mean, I see that a lot in organizations anyway. It used to be that you were Microsoft and that's it. But now it's very much horses for courses, and at most places tend to be
completely. It's interesting when we were discussing this in terms of the way the polls worked, because you could only actually vote for one thing.
Yes.
It had been handy to sort of just get everybody's view on it. I mean, this pretty much sums up what we're seeing, in that it's not really aligned to one thing, and that by far most people are actually using a combination of these things. Interesting that when we put SaaS provider there, maybe I wasn't clear on that. I was thinking in terms of using somebody that has an AI product, for example, that just being them. So using it's hosted by them,
Right.
so it being
Like a
their own
third
one
party
rather
support
than
time. Yeah.
yeah, rather than using one of the big cloud players or using your own infrastructure or some hybrid of all of those things. But yeah, no, that's interesting. Nobody went for on-prem, which I think is we do still have some customers that do that, but it's very niche. It's often
Yeah.
in very specific environments where there is a very yes, where that is the only option open to them.
Okay.
And many people are thinking they'd definitely rather not do that, but that's where they are. Yeah.
Be interesting to run it again in like a year or two's time and then just see how
Yeah.
it's changed too. We wouldn't even be an option then, probably. We wouldn't even put it up there. Okay, and the other one, what AI solutions are you looking to implement? What do you read into those results then?
Yeah, so we've got agentic AI workflow. Yep, chat. I mean, to some extent, often those chatbots could almost be a very specific implementation of that workflow. Yeah, the one that I forgot to put on there actually was something that was much more traditional machine learning in its aspect of building big data and then using that. Yeah, and I think, and obviously this is in terms of people developing systems. This isn't necessarily in terms of people using these tools for their own personal productivity, which
Yeah.
is slightly kind of separate to that. But yeah, that certainly ties in with what we see. Mm-hmm.
Just jumping back onto the chat, I can see that, yeah, links have been posted. So by all means, people jump on there. You'll find our LinkedIn profiles on there. Also, CTO Craft, link there on how to join the community as well and get onto Slack if you're not on that already. So in the last few minutes then, we start to think about wrapping up. I guess there's always a question of how do people get started? So there's probably people that have joined us and are still looking at it of like, I know I ought to do more than I am doing. What's
Mm-hmm.
the one thing that someone could do in the next week that would sort of start them on that journey, do you think, and start to get
Sure. And I think, I guess I could go down around specific resources and that kind of thing, but they will change. For me, the most important thing is building that continuous learning habit, for want of a better word. And that's probably the right word to use, actually, building something into your daily life so that you spend the time doing it and set aside that time doing it. Because sometimes I've come across individuals where they've maybe just been into this massively for 2 months and that's been a thing, and then it's just kind of dwindled away a bit. That's not going to help. It's about embedding that in, and the small improvements over a very long period of time. That investment in time will pay dividends in the coming sort of years. I mean, if you are using one of those big cloud providers and they have a lot of assets themselves, which are of a decent quality in terms of how to use those, I personally myself, have something which just correlates a number of sort of YouTube channels and news feeds and various other things that I look at to sort of compose that together, and then I can sort of take a look at what it is that I look at, because there's only so many hours in the day and time's very limited. Because there is some amazing quality free resources out there, some of which is very new, but at the same time there's some terrible sort of clickbaity things out there as well. And what you don't want to do is spend your time just jumping from pillar to post looking at those and not actually getting value from it. The other thing in my mind is that learning's great, but when all's said and done, it's actually about applying it. You don't just want to be consuming content or consuming training materials. And in my head, there's no better way to actually try to make this thing work than having a real live project and an end goal that you work towards. And that will be hard, because you will find obviously that the way in which things work really nicely in demos or in video assets in terms of how to set something up, when the rubber hits the road and it doesn't quite work in that context, it's going to be hard and you need to step outside of that. But I think that's where you really learn. And sort of overcoming that. So it's a blend of consuming things which helps you understand, but what you don't want to do is just consume, because then you don't retain it. You have to apply it as well.
Excellent.
And actually, just one last thing, a practical thing I use. So within Google, there's Notebook LM, which allows you to upload a set of assets to it. It can then summarize those. It can do whatever else you want with them, but it will also actually generate a bit of a test. So you can have it generate a test at the end of that. So
That's
you
so
can
mean
then.
to yourself. You're using setting yourself tests as well.
Oh, sorry, what's that?
That's so mean to yourself, not just to other people. Like,
Oh,
yeah,
it's
give
more a
myself
quiz.
a test at the end.
Let's not use the word test. Let's use the word quiz. I think
That's
they
better.
might be using the word quiz. But so when you dig into sort of learning protocols and how best to learn, so much of that is about testing yourself
Yeah.
immediately after you've learned it, actually. And oddly enough, it doesn't really matter how well you're doing those tests. as long as you review the answers, it just helps retain knowledge so much more.
Yeah.
So then you can remember what it is that you've done.
Brilliant. Right. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. So thanks very much, Ash. It was really interesting. I could quite easily have just carried on the conversation about another hour.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, so on behalf of CTO Craft, thank you all for watching. We do have lots more Bytes events coming up, so check the website and stay up to date. Thanks for joining. Join us on the community and carry on talking. And yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Ash. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks very much, Emma. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Take care. Bye. Bye.